Okay, go. Go. You're good.
Okay?
Yeah.
This is a story about the great storm, the great blizzard of 47-48 in Wyoming. My family moved there in April of 1948 and lived in an old homestead shack. It had no electricity, no running water, and was basically like camping out. My dad had lived in Canada for a number of years, and so as fall came, he was very concerned about what winter would be like in Wyoming. And he got storm windows on and chinked up all the cracks and even put dirt up around the edges of the house so no wind could blow under the house. And everybody around there was very amused at this guy who was doing all this to get ready for winter. However, his plans worked out well. He and our family went to church on Sunday morning, and it was about 1.5 miles from our house on a dirt road up to the little town of Keyline where we had our church service. Most of the other people in that area were Catholic, and they went to Lusk, which was about 25 miles away. We had prepared with plenty of food, plenty of everything. Dad had even tied a rope between the house and the barn so that you could hold on to it to get to the coal that was out there that was our fuel. We had a potbelly stove and a coal range both in one room. When the storm started, we barely got home from the 1.5 miles that we had to go. The people who went to Lusk for church were not back home for weeks, and all of their stock perished. The storm raged on with a constant pounding and a wind of almost 100 miles an hour for 3 days and 3 nights. It was, even in the daytime, it was dark, and we had to use a kerosene lamp. It was so cold we had to wear our coats in the house, and the wind blowing against the stovepipe created such a static electricity that every time you touched the stove you'd get a shock, like walking across a carpet. Us kids figured out that if you held hands and the shock passed from about 3 or 4 people, the guy on the end really got popped. Mom couldn't hardly cook because every time she'd stir something on the stove she'd get a shock. We had absolutely nothing to do, and so we played dominoes for hours and hours and hours on end. We were able to get to the barn to get coal for our potbelly stove, and so other than the fact that we were just totally bored and a little cold, we did pretty good. We kids slept in the upstairs, and the house would sway with the wind. When you were upstairs, you could feel the sway. On Sunday morning, our cousin Warren had left his sister at home alone and had gone to see his girlfriend. As the storm began, most were not too worried because, as a rule, these storms would blow themselves out in a few hours and they could get home. However, this was a different kind of storm, and as the hours passed, it became evident that no one was going to get home. Vira, who was alone at home, used all the coal and all the wood in the house, and afraid to go out in the storm, was about to start breaking up the furniture for fuel. Warren was so worried about his sister alone at home that he left his girlfriend's house, and holding on to the barbed wire fence, he walked home a trip of nearly 10 miles. Unbelievable that he was able to survive the storm and find his way home and save his sister. And then it was over, and the wind stopped, and you could hardly believe the silence. Our house was completely surrounded by snowbanks up as high as the second-story windows, but the snow hadn't blown in against the house. It had left a circle around the house, so there was a circle of bare ground for about 10 feet, and then this huge snowbank, and we had to make steps, and we chopped steps so that you could go up and then walk across the snow that was so hard you could walk on it, and then made steps down to the barn to get to the barn. we missed 6 weeks of school, and when we did get back in school, we had to walk up to the highway for 1.5 miles. There was no train through for 48 days. The roads weren't open for 3 months. They made some attempt to try and save the cattle with the airlift of hay, but most of them perished. And in the spring, finally, when they were able to get the roads open, they took out truckload after truckload of dead cattle that had perished in the storm. Dad drove the school bus about this time, and so it was hard. We couldn't go down the roads at all. The roads were totally blown shut, but you could go across the fields where the wind had blown some of the snow away. And so I was his helper, and we would get out there with shovels and try to get through to get to the kids to get them to school. But basically we missed about 3 months of school. The pictures are unbelievable. The snow came up to the crossbars on the telephone poles. That's the old days when telephone lines were on telephone poles. And you could stand on top. We have a picture of a patrolman standing on top of his car, reaching up as high as he can, and he still can't reach the top of the snowbank. And a picture of a little girl who got up on the snow and walked up and sat on the crossbar of the telephone pole. So Dad's experience in Canada served us well because he was well prepared for the storm. We did have one funny incident that happened that I'll have to tell you about. We had a table about the size of a card table against the door. It was a door we didn't use. It was on the north side of the house, and it had all of our canned goods stacked on it. And in the night, the wind was blowing so hard it began to work that door loose until it worked it loose just enough that there was just a tiny crack. And Mother had already gone through with rags and stuffed all the keyholes and stuffed all around all the windows because the snow would blow in the tiniest little crack. And they had never been cold in bed there. Mom and Dad slept on the main floor. And this night they got cold, and Dad said there must be something wrong because usually they'd bank the fire and it'd stay warm. And about the time he said that, the door came open and snow blew in at 100 miles an hour. They jumped out of bed. They couldn't even stand up. The floor was slick because the snow had been seeping in that crack and covering the whole floor. And they finally found a hammer and some nails, and they nailed that door all the way up and down. So they had a slippery time getting that taken care of. We kids thought it was the greatest adventure we'd ever had, but a lot of other people didn't. So I hope if you ever have a great blizzard, you are prepared for it.
About 1.5 minutes left.
Okay.
Any other funny stories?
Oh, let's see. What other funny stories did we have in that storm? There were no toilet facilities, of course, because we had no plumbing. But Mom was prepared for that, too. She had the chamber pots, the old-fashioned kind, not the kind you cook with. And so you got to use the chamber pot, and then someone got to take it outside and empty it. Wasn't the pleasantest thing. To tell you about it.
Okay,
it was lots of fun.
We can show pictures. Let's show pictures.
Okay.
Where are you?
Here's a picture of the policeman standing on top of his car.
Yeah, you can't even tell.
Can you tell?
Not really.
Oh, that's too bad. Maybe it's just...
look like that. You can tell better there. What other ones?
I think on this side we have the little girl sitting on the telephone pole.
Oh, yeah.
Whoop, if I hold it still, you can see her up there.
That's good.
I don't know if you can tell anything from that or not.
You can see it. Pretty good.
I can show you a picture of our house. At that time, it was not in as good a shape. It didn't have the side on it. Basically, That's what it looked like when we got there. You can see there was no plumbing.
You're good. We're done.
Okay. You want to have the other one? After a while, well, if it'll come apart. After a while, Dad built on it, looked better.
It does look better.
But it was a great experience.